After years of mocking my infertility, my sister-in-law begged me to adopt her baby for cash. I called CPS instead, and I never imagined that infertility would become the defining struggle of my life. Caleb and I had spent 8 exhausting years trying to have a child, enduring endless tests, failed IVF cycles, and draining our savings, all for nothing. The heartbreak was unbearable, and after our last failed attempt, we finally accepted that biological children weren't in our future. It hurt, but we started to find peace in the idea of fostering or adopting when we were ready. But not everyone in our lives was supportive. Caleb's younger sister, Tessa, made sure of that. She was 28, a mother of 3 under the age of 5, and never missed an opportunity to remind me of her effortless fertility. Every family gathering was a reminder of my failure. Honestly, I just have to look at Daniel and, bam, pregnant. She'd laugh loudly, making sure everyone heard her. Maybe you're just too stressed, Maeve. Relaxing might help, if you can. And the worst? Maybe it's a sign you're not meant to be a mom. No one in Caleb's family ever defended me. His parents, Linda and George, would brush it off with, "She doesn't mean it," or "That's just Tessa being Tessa." But it wasn't just Tessa being Tessa. It was cruelty. After our last failed IVF, I couldn't face another family gathering. I pulled away entirely. Caleb understood, and we both agreed to limit contact with her. Linda and George tried to keep the peace, but their excuses for Tessa's behavior had worn thin. Caleb supported me, but I knew he felt caught in the middle. I didn't care anymore. Tessa's husband, Mark, was no help either. At 33, he was more of a ghost than a partner, always complaining about money, never helping with the kids, and leaving Tessa to handle everything. I heard through family gossip that their marriage was hanging by a thread, but somehow, she still found time to sneer at me about being childless. Then, a few weeks ago, Linda called me. Her voice a mix of exhaustion and worry. "Tessa's pregnant again," she said quietly. "But she's not happy about it." Not happy? The queen of smug motherhood? Apparently, she was overwhelmed, struggling to keep her head above water with 3 kids already and a husband who barely contributed. Part of me thought, maybe this is karma, but I didn't dwell on it. Her problems weren't mine. Until one night, my phone rang unexpectedly. "Tessa." I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. When I did, her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying for hours. "I need you to take the baby," she blurted out. I froze. "What?" "I want you to adopt the baby when it's born," she repeated, her voice cracking. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The same woman who had mocked my infertility for years was now offering me her baby? "Why me?" I asked, suspicion rising in my chest. "You've never—" "I can't do this again," she interrupted. "I'm drowning. Mark doesn't help. The bills, the kids. I can't. Please, Maeve." I felt a pang of sympathy, but something about this felt off. Why now? She had never once offered help when we were struggling, never offered to let us babysit, let alone adopt one of her children. Now, out of the blue, she was handing me her baby? "I need to talk to Caleb," I said, ending the call quickly. When Caleb got home, I told him everything. He sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "She's up to something," he said without hesitation. I agreed. There was no way Tessa had suddenly developed a conscience. Caleb pulled out his phone and called Linda. "Mom, is Tessie okay financially?" Linda hesitated before answering. "She's struggling. Maxed out her credit cards. Mark's not helping financially either. Between daycare, rent, groceries, she's barely getting by." We sat in silence after hanging up. It made sense now. This wasn't about helping me. This was desperation. To test the waters, I texted Tessa, asking if she was sure about her decision and whether Mark was on board. Her reply came fast. "I've thought about this a lot. You deserve to be a mom, Maeve. This is my way of making things right after everything." No mention of Mark. Just a manipulative attempt to make me feel grateful. Caleb read over my shoulder and shook his head. "Mark doesn't know," he said flatly. The next day, I met Jordan, an old acquaintance who still kept in touch with Tessa. Casually, I asked how Tessa was handling her pregnancy. I didn't mention the adoption offer, Just wanted to see what she knew. Jordan raised an eyebrow. You haven't heard? She's been telling people she might charge for the adoption. Like, name a price before handing the baby over. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a selfless mother trying to do what was best for her baby. This was a transaction. A deal. I called Tessa the second I got home. She answered on the first ring. Are you expecting money for this? I asked bluntly. She didn't deny it. She tried to twist it, saying, Of course you'd help me out in return. It's only fair. You'd have a baby, Maeve. You owe me. I was speechless. That's illegal, I managed to say. She got defensive fast, yelling that I was ungrateful, that I should be thanking her for even considering me. I hung up, feeling sick. Caleb took my phone and blocked her number. We had to do something, not just for the baby, but for the other kids in that house. Something wasn't right. The morning after blocking Tessa's number, I sat at my laptop, my coffee growing cold as I stared at the screen. I wasn't just furious, I was scared. What Tessa had tried to do wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. Selling a baby wasn't some desperate plea for help. It was human trafficking. I typed in a quick search. What to do if someone tries to sell a baby for adoption? The results were a terrifying mix of legal consequences, heartbreaking stories, and warnings. My stomach churned as I clicked on a family law firm's website and dialed their number. Hypothetically, I asked the lawyer after explaining the situation vaguely, what would happen if someone offered a baby in exchange for money? The lawyer didn't hesitate. That's illegal in all states, she said. It can be prosecuted under human trafficking laws. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight on my chest. Thank you, I whispered. Hanging up, I found Caleb in the living room, flipping through the channels absent-mindedly. We have to report her, I said softly. He didn't argue. We do. But what about the kids? I asked, my voice trembling. If she's willing to sell this baby, what else is happening in that house? Caleb's jaw clenched. We can't ignore this. I nodded, feeling my hands shake as I reached for my phone. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally dialing the number for Child Protective Services. The operator answered, and I took a deep breath. I need to report something anonymously. I told them everything. Tessa's offer, the financial struggles, her refusal to mention Mark, and my suspicion that the other children might be in danger. They asked for proof, and I sent them screenshots of Tessa's messages. Once I hung up, all Caleb and I could do was wait. 3 days passed like an eternity, until Linda called, her voice frantic. CPS showed up at Tessa's house, she said, barely able to get the words out. She's going crazy. Apparently, Tessa started screaming the moment CPS knocked on the door, demanding to know who reported her. She didn't even wait for them to ask questions before accusing me. Right there in front of Mark, the kids, and the CPS workers. She said you were jealous, Maeve, Linda whispered, that you're trying to steal her baby. I felt my face burn with anger. But CPS wasn't there just for the unborn baby anymore. They wanted to investigate everything. That's when Mark found out the full story. Until that moment, he had no idea Tessa had offered me the baby. She had kept him completely in the dark. When the CPS worker mentioned that Tessa had asked for money, Mark snapped. What the hell were you thinking? He demanded. Tessa doubled down, insisting it wasn't a big deal, that everyone does it under the table. But CPS wasn't buying it. They started questioning the kids, the neighbors, even the teachers. What they found was worse than I had imagined. Linda called me again that night, her voice shaking. Her oldest told them. She told them Tessa leaves them alone for hours. Sometimes there's no food in the house. She's been taking care of the younger ones because Tessa is always too tired. Linda paused, and I could hear her crying softly. They flagged her for neglect on the spot. I couldn't even speak. This wasn't just a desperate mother making a bad choice. This was years of neglect, and no one had seen it, or wanted to see it. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, even messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Then Caleb's phone started lighting up too. Finally, Linda called again. Tessa's telling everyone you reported her out of jealousy, she said, her voice cracking. She's threatening to cut the whole family off if we don't take her side. I didn't even flinch. Caleb, though, had had enough. She tried to sell her baby. he told Linda firmly. She lied to Mark. CPS is involved because she's a terrible mother, not because of Maeve. Silence. Finally, Linda whispered, I didn't know. None of you did, Caleb replied bitterly. Because no one wanted to see it. He hung up and started blocking numbers, one by one. I followed his lead. Anyone who believed Tessa's lies wasn't someone we needed in our lives. Later that evening, I got a text from Caleb's cousin, Mia. Mark left. Apparently, after CPS showed up, Mark realized just how bad things had gotten. He packed a bag, took the kids, and left for his mother's house. He didn't even tell Tessa, just left. For the first time that day, I felt relief. But Tessa? She spiraled. She went straight to social media, posting long, tear-filled videos about how I had betrayed her, how I was trying to steal her children because I couldn't have my own. She never mentioned my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Some people are so miserable they'd rather steal someone else's kids than accept they'll never have their own, she wrote. Caleb grabbed my phone and blocked her. That night, my lawyer called. CPS had followed up. They've officially flagged her for child neglect, she said. There's a full investigation into her home life now. I exhaled slowly. What happens next? If she doesn't turn things around, she'll lose custody. But I knew Tessa. She wasn't going to change. Not when she believed she was always the victim. And I was right. She doubled down, telling anyone who would listen that I had made false claims to steal her kids. Caleb's family was split. Some believed her. Some didn't. Then the threat started. Watch your back. You destroyed a family. Hope you're happy. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Caleb didn't hesitate this time. We're done, he said, blocking every number tied to her. No more Tessa. No more enablers. No more toxicity. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Days passed, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Tessa's kids, scared, hungry, left alone while their mother spiraled out of control. I kept wondering how we'd all missed it. Or maybe we hadn't missed it at all. Maybe we just didn't want to believe it. Then Mark called. I almost didn't answer, unsure if I could handle more drama. But something told me I needed to hear him out. Maeve, he started, his voice shaky. I'm filing for full custody. Relief washed over me. I've ignored too much for too long, he admitted. I thought she was just overwhelmed. But after CPS, after hearing what the kids told them, I can't keep pretending. I sat down, heart pounding. CPS is still investigating, he continued. But if she doesn't turn things around fast, she's going to lose everything. She won't change, I said quietly. You know that. Mark sighed. Yeah, I know. He hesitated, then confessed something that made my blood run cold. A couple of years ago, when our youngest was still a baby, she left him with my mom. Said she just needed a weekend to herself. She didn't come back for weeks. My mom had to call her, beg her to come get him. Jesus, Mark, I whispered. I told myself it was a one-time thing, he said bitterly. But it wasn't. We talked for a while longer, and when we hung up, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Tessa wasn't just overwhelmed or desperate. She was dangerous. The days blurred together as CPS continued their investigation. Caleb and I distanced ourselves from the rest of the family, too exhausted to deal with their questions and accusations. But then, a week after Mark's call, something changed. Everything went silent. No texts, no calls, no social media rants from Tessa. It was almost eerie, like the calm before a storm. Then, late one night, Caleb and I were watching TV when a loud bang rattled our front door. Not a knock, pounding. We froze. Then came the shouting. Maeve, I know you're in there. You ruined my life. You stole my family. Tessa. Her voice was hoarse, slurred, her words running together in a frantic stream. I grabbed my phone and hit record as Caleb stood up, but I held up a hand to stop him. Let me handle this, I whispered. The pounding grew louder, the door handle rattling violently. Caleb pulled out his phone and called the police while I stood there, listening to Tessa's rant. You turned them against me. Mark, my kids, my parents, everyone. All because you couldn't have your own baby. I'd had enough. I stepped closer to the door, voice shaking with anger. You never wanted to be a mother, Tessa, I shouted. Your kids were never more than burdens to you. Bargaining chips. You deserve everything that's happening. The house fell silent for a moment. Then, with a sudden burst of rage, Tessa lunged at the door, trying to force it open. Caleb shouted that the police were on their way, but she didn't care. I yanked the door open just enough to shove her back. She stumbled, eyes wide with shock, then started screaming every insult she could think of. The flashing lights of 2 police cars illuminated the street just as Tessa tried to run, but she didn't get far. The officers cuffed her as she screamed that she was only trying to talk to me. Caleb played them the recording, and her excuses crumbled. She was arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and attempted forced entry. The moment they drove away, Caleb looked at me. It's over. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, CPS called. Tessa's arrest was the final straw, the caseworker said. She's officially lost custody. Mark has full legal guardianship now. No visitation, no appeals. I exhaled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. But Tessa wasn't done. The second she got out of jail, she went straight to social media, spinning another sob story. She's claiming I set her up. I told Caleb, scrolling through her posts, that I manipulated everyone. No one's going to believe that, he said. But some people did. A few family members, ones who had always defended Tessa, started sending me messages, accusing me of ruining her life out of jealousy. I blocked them all. Then I got a text from Mia. Mark's moving forward with his life. He's happy. The kids are happy. But Tessa, she's unraveling. Tessa had lost everything. Her kids, her marriage, her reputation, and she blamed me for all of it. I thought things couldn't get worse, but I was wrong. Tessa's rage wasn't something that would fade quietly. I knew that, but even knowing what she was capable of, I wasn't prepared for what came next. It started with the threats. Anonymous texts from blocked numbers. You'll regret this. Watch your back. You ruined her life. Hope you're happy. I knew it was Tessa, or someone she had convinced to do her dirty work, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Caleb didn't hesitate. We're going no contact, he said firmly. With everyone who supports her. He started blocking numbers while I sat in silence, processing what my life had become. Family members I'd known for years, people who had smiled at me at holidays, now believed I was some kind of monster. But Caleb was right. It had to end. We cut them all off. And for the first time in months, my phone was silent. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like a target, waiting for the next attack. Days passed with no word from Tessa. CPS continued their investigation into her home life, while Mark pushed forward with his custody case. The family group chats were dead, the drama seemingly frozen in place. Then, one afternoon, Caleb's phone buzzed. It was Mark. Tessa's appealing, Caleb said after hanging up. She found a lawyer. She's claiming the whole system is rigged against her. I laughed bitterly. Of course she is. But when Caleb handed me the legal papers, my smile vanished. Somehow, Tessa had found someone willing to argue that I was the real villain, that I had manipulated CPS, turned Mark against her, and fabricated evidence out of jealousy. She's still trying to twist this, I muttered, shaking my head. Mark's lawyer is already on it, Caleb reassured me. CPS has everything. The neglect reports, the police arrest, and the messages where she tried to sell the baby, but I couldn't shake the unease. The court ordered Tessa to take parenting classes and undergo a psychological evaluation if she wanted even a chance at visitation. She refused. Instead, she did what she always did. Ran to social media, ranting about corruption and betrayal. But this time, no one was listening. The same people who had defended her in the beginning were silent now. The truth was undeniable. Mark's kids were thriving without her, and everyone could see it. But Tessa wasn't done fighting. One night, Mark called again, his voice low and tense. She showed up at my mom's house, he said, banging on the door, demanding to see the kids. My chest tightened. Is everyone okay? Yeah, he sighed. But I had to file a restraining order. Tessa was spiraling fast, and her desperation made her dangerous. Her final move was as reckless as it was predictable. She made an anonymous report to CPS, claiming Mark was an unfit father. Caleb and I knew instantly who was behind it, but CPS had to investigate anyway. Weeks passed as they interviewed Mark, the kids, teachers, neighbors, everyone. When the case was dismissed as unfounded, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was finally over. I was wrong. The judge denied Tessa any custody. The only thing left was supervised visits, but only if she completed her court-ordered classes and evaluation. She refused. Instead, she doubled down on her victim narrative, telling anyone who would listen that the system had failed her, that Mark and I had plotted against her from the start. But no one cared anymore. Mark's kids were finally free from walking on eggshells around their mother's unpredictable moods. And Tessa had lost everything. But she wasn't done with me. Not yet. Tessa's life unraveled faster than I thought possible, and watching it unfold was like witnessing a slow-motion train wreck. After losing custody, she spiraled deeper into chaos, dragging herself down with every desperate attempt to regain control. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction watching her downfall, but mostly, I felt a gnawing sense of dread. People like Tessa didn't go quietly. At first, she tried to claw her way back through manipulation. She called old friends she hadn't spoken to in years, spinning sob stories about how she'd been wronged, about how the evil system had taken her children from her. She begged for money, promising to pay it back once she got back on her feet, but anyone who knew Tessa knew that was a lie. She never intended to pay anyone back. She just wanted what she wanted, like always. Some of those friends reached out to me, warning me that Tessa was asking for money under the guise of starting over. They said she was telling people she was homeless, living out of her car, and betrayed by everyone she loved. But no one was falling for it anymore. She had burned too many bridges, hurt too many people. When that didn't work, she tried to get to Mark. She called him late at night, leaving voicemails filled with fake tears and empty apologies. "I can't do this without you," she sobbed into the phone. "Please, Mark, I need you." But Mark wasn't the same man who had ignored her behavior for years. He was done. Every time she called, he let it go to voicemail. Every time she texted, he left her on read. He wasn't cruel about it, but he was firm. For him, and for the kids, there was no going back. Tessa didn't take rejection well. When the sweet pleading didn't work, she flipped the switch. "Enjoy your pathetic life, Mark." One text read, "You're nothing without me." Another voicemail, her voice dripping with venom, spat, "You'll never find someone better than me. You'll regret this." But Mark didn't respond, and that silence drove Tessa insane. She started missing work. At first, it was a day here, a day there. Then it became entire weeks. No shows, no calls. Rumors spread that she had been caught sleeping in her car in the parking lot during her shift breaks. Finally, her boss had enough. She was fired for attendance issues, but everyone knew that was just the surface. The truth was, she was unraveling. With no job and no financial support from Mark or her family, she fell behind on rent fast. I heard through the family grapevine that she begged her landlord for an extension, but he wasn't having it. Within weeks, she was evicted, her belongings dumped unceremoniously on the sidewalk. Tessa had always been proud in the most twisted way. She loved flaunting her life, even when it was falling apart behind closed doors. Now, she had nothing left to flaunt. No home, no job, no family. She bounced between friends' couches, burning every last bit of goodwill she had left. Each time, she stayed too long, demanded too much, and left behind drama and debt. Her social media presence became unbearable. Every day, there was a new post, a new rant. She blamed me, Caleb, Mark, her parents, everyone but herself. According to Tessa, she was the victim of a grand conspiracy orchestrated by jealous, bitter people who couldn't stand to see her happy. But the thing was, people were tired. They were tired of the drama, tired of the lies, tired of Tessa. Her posts got fewer and fewer likes. Her comments section, once filled with sympathy and support, was now a ghost town. And then came the final blow. One night, Caleb's cousin Mia sent me a series of screenshots that made my stomach turn. Tessa's last remaining friend, Someone who had stood by her through everything had finally had enough. She leaked their private conversations, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Tessa hadn't just considered selling her unborn baby. She had planned it in detail. The messages showed her negotiating a price, discussing terms like it was a business transaction. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just cold calculation. When the screenshots hit the family group chats, it was over. Even the relatives who had defended her in the beginning went silent. No one could justify this. No one could pretend it was just a misunderstanding. She wasn't a struggling mother who had made a bad decision. She was a manipulator willing to sell her own child for cash. Caleb looked at me after reading the messages. This is it. She's done. We blocked her on everything. Social media, phone numbers, emails. We changed our numbers and cut off anyone who tried to pass along her messages. Even Caleb's parents, who had spent years defending her, refused to help when she called them begging for money. She needs help, Linda whispered to me once. But we can't give it to her. Tessa was burning every bridge, but she didn't care. She still thought she could manipulate her way back into people's lives. She reached out to Caleb's parents again, begging for money, promising that this time she would change. But even they had reached their limit. They refused. I thought that would be the end. I thought that, finally, Tessa would disappear from our lives. But she wasn't done. Mia texted me one night. Tessa's telling people she's homeless, begging for money. No one's helping her anymore. I stared at the message for a long time. There was a flicker of pity, a tiny part of me that remembered all the times I had wanted to help her, to be there for her despite everything. But that part of me was small now. Too much had happened. She made her choices, Caleb said quietly, reading over my shoulder. This is what she created. Meanwhile, Mark was moving forward with his life. The kids were thriving without the constant stress of Tessa's mood swings and neglect. For the first time in years, they felt safe, stable, and happy. Then, the news that sent Tessa into another spiral. Mark was dating someone new. I found out from Mia, of course. Mark's seeing someone. She seems nice. Tessa's losing her mind over it. Tessa flooded Mark's phone with calls and messages, each one more desperate than the last. I'll change, she promised. I'll be better for the kids, she lied. You can't do this to me, she screamed. But Mark had moved on, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pull him back into her chaos. She clung to the one thing she had left, supervised visits with her kids. It was her only tether to the life she had lost. But even that started slipping. She canceled one visit, then another. Sometimes she wouldn't even call to explain. She just wouldn't show up. And every time she missed a visit, she slipped further away from her children. It didn't take long for Mark to make his next move. He filed to terminate her parental rights completely. No more supervised visits. No more connection. When the court agreed, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Tessa had nothing left. No kids, no home, no family, no support. She drifted between temporary housing and old acquaintances, but each time, she was kicked out faster than before. No one wanted to deal with her anymore. Eventually, even her calls for help went unanswered. She was fading from everyone's lives. And for the first time in years, Caleb and I had peace. But I knew better than to believe Tessa would go quietly. I was right.